Welcome back. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and today I'm building the GMT from scratch. Which is not something I thought I'd ever say, but when DIY Watch Club reached out and asked if I wanted to try their new GMT build kit, how could I refuse? Plus, it seemed like a great opportunity to check out the new Seiko NH34 GMT movement, which is powering it. Now, if you're not familiar with DIY Watch Club, as the name suggests, they provide kits with everything you need to build one of their watches. And that also includes the tools needed to complete the build. They've really set themselves up as an easy and painless way to get into watch building and modding. And this is actually the second kit of theirs I've gotten. Last time I made a sports watch. For this video, I'm going to try to multitask and talk while I do the build, or at least that's the plan, and we'll see how well it goes. So with that in mind, let me show you what they sent and what I'm attempting to build. And I do want to point out that this is not going to be a full step-by-step tutorial. When it comes to watchmaking and modding, I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to really be teaching anyone. Yet, one of the great things about DIY Watch Club is that you don't need me giving you a step-by-step tutorial, as not only do they provide the kit with all the parts and tools you need to complete it, but they also provide step-by-step instructions with video tutorials to make sure you know how. Although for this video, except for a couple of parts, I'm going to pretty much ignore their instructions. Like I said, I know enough to be dangerous. And there's only two things that I'm not 100% sure on. Now, the last time I did a build, they sent along their standard toolkit, which has been pretty nice, and I've used it to store all of my tools. But this time they sent their upgraded kit, and I gotta say, this thing is really nice. And I'm probably going to use this from now on to store my tools, as well as maybe a prop in the background from some of my videos. But while it's nice to have, remember it's not going to help you build this any faster or better than what you're already capable of. Plus, I should probably point out that if you already have all the tools you need, then there is an option to buy only the watch parts. Or they also offer parts a la carte so you can design your own build, or even mix and match from various suppliers. Which for more experienced modders is one of the great things about modding, making something that is truly your own. But when you're first starting out, deciding what parts to use and how they go together is sometimes the more frustrating part of building. Anyway, let me start pulling stuff out and we can just get going with it. Got some of your standard tools, your little blowy apparatus, monocle if you want to pretend you're evil, watch strap that we'll eventually need later. The version they sent is a Coca-Cola bezel, and again, we're going to need this later. Then we have the movement, the brand new Seiko NH34A. Can't do anything without the case, and I should probably be wearing finger cots at this point, but I'll get to that in a second. The watch parts themselves come in these little boxes, and we'll open these in a second. Then underneath here, you got some tools. Set that stuff there. Which does come out for convenience. And then underneath here, got a few more things. Now, the one thing I will say is that you always want to use finger cots when doing this, but the last time I used theirs, my fingers felt like they're about to fall off after a half hour. So in preparation for this build, I bought a bunch off Amazon that say they're a larger size. Now, if I was doing this off camera, I'd probably have some music playing, maybe the TV on in the background, just to help distract a little bit, because this can get a little boring. But just because of YouTube and all the music rights restrictions stuff, it's just gonna be me and quiet. And as a side note, I think this movement right here in the kit from DIY Watch Club is further proof that this next year is going to be the year of the Seiko GMT. Because if they have it, then pretty much everyone's going to have it. Now, one of the reasons that there are going to be so many GMTs next year is because Seiko made this NH34A pretty compatible with the existing NH35. If I remember right, the dimensions are just about the same. The only real difference is that you need a slightly bigger hole in the dial and a little bit more clearance between the dial and the top of the crystal, just to make room for the extra hand. But other than that, I think they're pretty similar, and that's why so many different brands out there have been able to crank these out, or at least announce that one is coming so quickly from release. Like DIY Watch Club, I'm sure this is based on their existing diver that uses an NH35. So if a brand has a good watch that uses an NH35, it's pretty easy to transition it over to being a new GMT. Although I'm personally more curious about conversion kits, not necessarily full build kits, and I think those are going to be coming soon as well. I think SKX Mod has mentioned that they're going to be working on a SKX to SKK build, because I'm sure a lot of existing SKX and 5KX users would want to convert theirs to a GMT. And I'm also curious about how well these conversion kits might work on some of the good AliExpress watches out there. Like, could you take a $100 Steel Dive 1970 and create a GMT out of it? Anyway, let's find the dial. Hey, first try, found the dial. And I think, like some of their other watches, this is actually a sandwich dial. Hopefully it's got good lume, but we'll see. Alright, so let's find the GMT hand. And DIY Watch Club always gives you two, just in case you really screw up. So, not perfectly lined up, but pretty close. And now the hardest part of the build, which is putting on the second hand. Not only is it small and fragile, but it always seems to take me about 5 to 10 times longer to do it than any of the other hands. Although if you do have a trick for putting on the second hand, please let me know down below. Now, one very important thing about watchmaking is that if you're getting tired, you're getting frustrated, take a break. And that's what I'm gonna do right now, because the second hand's bothering me a little bit, as well as my fingers feel like they're about to fall off. So I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I spent way more time getting that second hand on than I'd like to admit. It's like an hour and a half later, and I probably spent 40 minutes just on the second hand. It's frustrating. Had to go back, rewatch a few videos, and remind myself how you kind of do it. And even then, you really need to take your time and just be patient with it, because the more frustrated you get, the more your hands are a little shaky, and the less it's likely to go on right. Plus, the more likelihood that you're going to wind up scratching something, which I think I got a few little scratches on the dial now. But that's just sort of part of the game. Second hand moving, all the hands are there. The GMT hand is kind of up, and I've been having a hard time getting it laid back down, but everything kind of clears as it goes. So I'm just going to leave it alone and just roll with it. So with that in mind, let's get the finger cots back on and get this thing back in the case. And as you can see, there's a whole lot more other tools and things that I was just desperately trying to get on it, as well as a few other different sets of hands to see if maybe it was the hand, but no, it was more me. Actually, before we get much further, there's one thing to talk about. The case, as it is, since it's based on their regular diver, has unidirectional bezel. But part of the instructions say that you can convert it to a bidirectional bezel by popping off and taking off the little notch spring, or whatever it's actually called. Although by doing so, you will lose any sort of clicky action. So I think it's just free spinning. Which brings up the question, what's worse for a GMT? One that doesn't have anything, or one that's going unidirectional? I'm inclined to keep it as is, but just for the sake of the video, I figure I'll pop it off and try to take the thing out. So take that off. And then remove the spring. Just takes a little bit of force to put it back on. That should be good to go. And with that, gotta clean this up just one more time. At least the interior. Should be holes, and it should just line up to the movement holder. Right. Stick the crown in. Hope it goes in. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but I don't think so. There are no other parts left to put on it. And last, but certainly not least, the Coke bezel insert. And let's hope I can actually get it lined up. Although if it doesn't click, I guess it really doesn't matter at that point. And with that, we are almost done. Just put on the straps, take the plastic off, and see what we got. One thing to talk about here is value. And value is always tricky when you're talking about mod projects or build projects. Usually there isn't a lot here. Sometimes you're going to spend a lot more on building up a watch rather than just buying one. That, and unless you're a famous watchmaker, or unless you're just really, really good at watchmaking, nobody's going to buy it after you're done. Pretty much stuck with this for the rest of my life. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing if it's something you really like. But in a lot of ways, the value, if you can call it that, is the experience doing it. The fun, so to speak. Although that secondhand was not fun. That, and you can look at it afterwards and say, hey, I made that. That's my watch. Although in some ways, with this particular GMT movement, there may actually be some value here. Because right now, these are on sale for $370, and that's actually cheaper than the Seiko 5. And other than the Seiko 5, there aren't many of these out in the wild quite yet. But that's going to change, and change quickly over the next year. Now, one thing to note is that if you really want to get into modding or building, you don't actually have to buy everything from DIY Watch Club. There are plenty of places out there to buy watch parts, and oftentimes they're going to be cheaper. If you're comparing prices, DIY Watch Club is going to be a little higher, and I think part of that premium is because it's their own designs, as well as they kind of throw everything together as a kit for convenience. Plus, you gotta count the tools. And in that way, they've set themselves up as a great, painless way to get into modding for beginners. And it's especially good if you like the designs. But the thing is, once you're actually experienced with all of this, you don't quite need them. A lot of the more experienced modders actually like to design their own projects, and they like to go and pick and hunt different parts from different sources. So DIY Watch Club's kind of in this interesting place where it's great for beginners, but once they teach you what you need to know, you're probably going to outgrow them. And the only way they can really counter that is to make really good designs, or designs that might appeal to you. Or do something like this, because so far there aren't many other options around to get a GMT movement. But as things go on, again, that will change. Now, this has taken a bit longer than I was expecting for this build, and I'm actually kind of tired right now. So I'm going to take a break, I'm going to wear this for a few days, and then Future Shane's going to come back and tell you what he thinks of the watch. Future Shane here, ready to close this out with a few final thoughts. Now, after wearing this for a few days, I have to say it's pretty nice. It's comfortable to wear with a pretty nice presence, especially with the very flexible rubber strap. The contrast is great, and it's fairly easy to read with the polished hands against the matte black dial. I'm really not a fan of this whole DWC whatever thing on the dial, but I gotta say the ceramic Coke bezel looks pretty sharp. And lume here is surprisingly good as well with that sandwich dial. Now, it is a little thick at 14.3, but when you consider the domed crystal as well as the Seiko-based movement, that thickness is a little understandable. And overall, it feels like a fairly well-built diver. Although, I of course have a few critiques and nitpicks about this one as well. And the number one thing that's bothered me over the last couple of days is that the edges are really sharp, and especially in between the lugs, which normally wouldn't be a huge problem. But the bezel here, especially with the bezel spring out, is really tight and hard to turn. So I have to get a really good grip on it, and inevitably I'm going to hit the inner edges of those lugs when I'm trying to turn it. So in the long run, I might wind up putting that bezel spring back in. Unidirectional might be better to what I have here. Although I might give it a little bit more time, it might lighten up with just use. I also wish the chapter ring had 24-hour indicators on it. It's not necessary with a GMT, but it is nice to have, and especially if you're trying to read more than 2 time zones. As it is now, it kind of seems like they just converted their standard diver over by swapping a bezel insert, which is probably what they did here. And also, one more thought about that nice toolbox, and this came to me as I was trying to clean up the huge mess I had after I was done. And I realized that this is more of a presentation box than an actual toolkit, as there aren't any extra spots for any extra tools you might want to store in it. So while it does make a killer first impression, I would have preferred if they made it more as a straight toolbox and something you could use after the fact, rather than having these empty slots I'll never really be able to use again. Bottom line, this is a really cool toolkit, and if you're interested in watch modding or building and you have no idea where to start, then DIY Watch Clube is worth checking out. And this GMT kit is probably their most interesting watch right now. However, if you have no interest in building a watch and you just want a good cheap Seiko-based GMT, then technically, right now, this is probably the cheapest option out there for you. But even with that, I wouldn't recommend it. Because if you have no interest in the experience, you're just going to lose your patience when you're trying to build the thing. And that's really a recipe for disaster. So for you, just wait. The affordable GMTs are going to come fast and furious. And within a few months, you're going to be sick about hearing about all the new ones coming. Plus, there's always a good chance that the Seiko 5s will be on sale for the holidays. Anyway, as usual, let me know what you think about this down below. And if you're interested in more mod projects, I actually have parts to mod out this Casio coming, so stay tuned for that. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, you all know what to do down below. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time. See you next time.